Hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about something so unbelievably ordinary, so fantastically dull, that your brain may attempt to fall asleep before I finish this sentence. The paperclip. Yes, that tiny bit of twisted wire that's probably clinging to a receipt in your junk drawer right now. But as your eyelids get heavier and your thoughts slow down, you'll find that behind the mild-mannered curve of this little tool lies a history so unexpectedly winding, it's almost ridiculous. You're not just drifting through another office supply tutorial. You're stepping into wartime production lines, espionage networks, moral paradoxes, and accidental design legends. You'll walk through history with this unassuming object at your side, because yes, the paperclip saw it all. And frankly, you probably won't survive this tale of bureaucratic tension and wire-based suspense, but hey, it'll be a soft ending. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I always love seeing how far this little corner of the internet reaches. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing in the clang and heat of a World War I era steelworks. Not a glamorous place, really. Soot smudges the air and machinery screams in regular bursts. But somewhere among the blast furnaces and grease-stained aprons, a coil of wire is being carefully twisted into a shape that's deceptively simple. Two nested loops, snug and modest. It's not a weapon. It doesn't explode. It doesn't even pierce anything. But it will soon conquer the world in its own passive-aggressive way. The paperclip story begins not with high drama, but with a practical problem: loose paper. In the mid-19th century, offices ran on handwritten ledgers, carbon paper, and chaos. You didn't save anything. You just tied it together with string, stabbed it with a brass fastener, or lost it entirely. The need for something reusable, non-invasive, and unassuming was rising quietly like steam in a teacup. And so inventors started to fidget. One early contender was Samuel B. Fay, who patented a bent wire clip in 1867. But before you start imagining the familiar paperclip silhouette, hold up. Fay's design was meant for attaching tickets to fabric, not holding paper. It looked more like a corset hook that got distracted halfway through its job. Still, it was a start. In the background, steel wire manufacturing was evolving. Better rolling mills, more consistent alloys, and cheaper production meant that fine, resilient wire was now accessible to tinkering minds. The kind of minds that couldn't look at a paper pile without itching to optimize. Fast forward to 1899, and a company called the Gem Manufacturing Co. in Britain is quietly producing something beautiful, a wire looped in a graceful, elongated oval. No sharp ends, no need for punching holes. It just slides on and hugs the pages. They don't patent it because they're British and modest and possibly allergic to paperwork. Now here's the twist someone in America notices. Specifically, a guy named William D. Middlebrook, who patents a paperclip making machine in 1899. Not the clip itself, just the machine. His version mimics the gem shape almost exactly, but guess what? Since the design isn't patented, no one sues anyone. That's right, the paperclip slipped through the cracks of the IP system like a sleek eel made of steel. It's around now that things get messy in the best possible way. Historians still argue whether Middlebrook invented the paperclip or just mechanized a design already floating around. Some insist the gem company deserves credit. Others throw in random patent holders like Cornelius Brosnan and his vaguely clip-like wire gizmo. No one agrees. And because it's a paperclip, no one really tries that hard to sort it out. While the academics grumble, the clip marches forward. By the early 20th century, office culture is blooming. You can almost hear the typewriters clicking and the cigarette smoke curling under ceiling fans. Clerks everywhere are sliding these little steel saviors onto invoices and memos. The paperclip becomes, without fanfare, essential. It does its job silently and then disappears into a drawer. It's the bureaucratic equivalent of a butler, always there, never acknowledged. Meanwhile, wire manufacturers realize they're onto something. They start experimenting. Thicker wire, galvanized coatings, fancy shapes. Some clips gain serrated edges to grip better. Others turn gold for no reason except vanity. One clip has a vaguely sinister claw design, like it wants to leave marks in your soul. Still, none surpass the simplicity of the gem. Its symmetry, its satisfying little spring tension, its sheer audacity to not change at all for over a century. It's quietly perfect, and so it continues. The paperclip settles into drawers, jacket pockets, pencil tins. It hitchhikes through time without resistance. It's there on a ration form in the 1940s, and it's there again on a TPS report in 1997. It may be slightly bent. It may have crumbs from someone's granola bar fused to it, but it is present. Here's a quirky detail you can savor as your head sinks deeper into the pillow. Paper clips are sometimes used in pickle locks. Yeah, turns out that humble little loop can be repurposed into a tool for espionage, breaking and entering, and the occasional locked bathroom door. Resourceful, slightly criminal minds have long appreciated the paperclip's potential beyond paper. Back in the real world, you're trudging through more factories, this time mid-century American ones, where paperclip production is a streamlined blur. Wire gets unspooled, bent, clipped, boxed, and shipped without anyone pausing to ask, is this a little too efficient? You notice something else too. Wartime rationing during both world wars didn't touch paperclips much. Steel was diverted, yes, but not entirely. Offices still needed to function. So, in a quiet way, the paperclip survived war better than most technologies. It was too small, too useful, and too entrenched to sacrifice. You might call it the cockroach of office supplies, but in a charming way. As you leave the factory floor, the sounds fade. Your steps slow. You look at your hand. There's a paperclip there now. Cold, light, perfectly coiled. It has no moving parts, no batteries, no app, and yet it holds your entire understanding of paperwork in place. This is only the beginning. You're still holding the paperclip. Its cold metal has warmed slightly against your fingers, like it's adjusting to you, like it's preparing to whisper secrets. You don't expect those secrets to involve Nazis, resistance movements, and a small Scandinavian nation quietly flipping the metaphorical bird to tyranny. But here we are. It's the early 1940s, and you're walking along the cobblestone streets of occupied Norway. The boots you hear echoing around corners aren't friendly. Nazi flags flutter above government buildings with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. But down at street level, something quieter is taking place. Something small. Something bent. Norway has just become the most unexpectedly symbolic battleground for a piece of stationery. You glance at someone's lapel. There's a metal loop pin there. At first, it seems like nothing. An accident. Maybe something that fell off their coat. But no, that little loop, an ordinary paperclip, is worn on purpose. It's a message. Because under German occupation, Norwegians aren't allowed to wear national symbols. No pins with royal emblems, no flags, no coat of arms brooches. So the people adapt in the most understated way possible. They start wearing paperclips. No one officially declares it a movement. It just spreads. Quietly. Subversively. The paperclip becomes a symbol of unity, resistance, and stubborn dignity. Something so small that the occupiers don't notice at first. But you know how occupiers are. Eventually, they always notice. The Nazis do what Nazis do. They ban it. Wearing a paperclip is declared an act of insubordination. Some are arrested for it. In a darkly comic twist, people are literally punished for what's essentially fastening nothing to nothing. Historians still argue whether the symbol began intentionally or organically. Some claim a Norwegian patent office employee named Johan Wahler invented the paperclip and that his countrymen later honored him through this act. Others say Wahler's design never made it to production and had nothing to do with the familiar clip. Either way, the idea caught on. And just like that, a boring little office supply became a quiet roar of national pride. You walk past more lapels, more paper clips. This one's slightly rusted, that one's polished. Some are large and awkward, clearly too big for the coat they're on. Others are dainty, tucked behind buttons or half concealed by scarves. It's fashion by necessity. Jewelry with purpose. You imagine someone getting dressed in the morning, looking in the mirror, picking out the clip like others pick out earrings. That small gesture, a loop of wire, carries the weight of defiance. You have to respect the drama of it, the subtlety, the brilliance. At this point, the paperclip isn't just a piece of bent steel. It's an act of storytelling. A symbol layered in meaning, forged not in design labs, but in the hearts of people under pressure. But because human history loves irony, here's something extra. That Norwegian claim about Valar inventing the paperclip, technically not true. He did patent something vaguely paperclip adjacent in 1899, but it was awkward and not particularly functional. No evidence shows it was ever produced. The true paperclip, the gem design you know and barely notice, already existed in England by then. But the myth endured and even ended up in textbooks. Eventually, Norway doubled down and memorialized the whole affair. At the University of Oslo, there's a 10-foot tall paperclip sculpture dedicated to Valar, erected not just as a nod to invention, but as a wink to resistance. It's made of granite and iron. It's as absurd and wonderful as it sounds. You walk around the base of it now. Its looped form is no longer small and subtle. It's towering, unmissable, a tribute to defiance hiding in plain sight. Children climb on it. Tourists pose beside it. Somewhere, an art critic is probably writing a tortured essay about its dialectic of containment and resistance. But you know better. You know this all started with a need to hold papers together. That's the part that makes it perfect. Back in the war years, people found other uses too. Clips held ration cards, propaganda leaflets, even escape maps printed on silk and folded tightly into soldiers' boots. Anything that could be secured discreetly and separated later. There's even a whisper in wartime lore about agents using paper clips to unlock handcuffs. It may be apocryphal, but it feels true, which is sometimes enough. You pass an office now, drab, gray, lit by an overhead bulb that buzzes like an anxious bee. A civil servant, sleeves rolled up, frowns at a stack of forms. He reaches instinctively for a paperclip and presses it into place. The action is automatic. But in the shadow of occupation, even automatic things gain meaning. The clip becomes a ritual, a reinforcement, and just like that, you're reminded of something odd and wonderful. The paperclip is not passive. It does something. It grips. It unites. It resists, both literally and symbolically. Another quirky detail for your slowly relaxing brain, in Norway the word binders is still used today to mean paperclip, a strange little echo from the German Aktenklammer. The foreign occupation changed the language itself, even as the clip became a national symbol of independence. There's a kind of poetry in that contradiction. So what happens when the war ends? Well, paper clips keep showing up. They're still pinned to lapels in quiet remembrance. They're still sliding across pages in offices trying to rebuild a continent. Their role in resistance becomes part of the folklore shared in books, schools, and whispered bedtime stories about how something small helped people feel big. You take one last look at the oversized sculpture in Oslo. It doesn't feel silly anymore. It feels earned. It's a monument not just to the object, but to the idea that sometimes the smallest things hold us together when everything else is falling apart. And as you drift slowly into the post-war quiet, you can't help but smile at the fact that the next time you see a bent wire holding your electric bill together, you'll think of underground movements, soft resistance, and a nation that said no without raising its voice. All with a paperclip. You're still in post-war Europe, still brushing off bits of resistance, rust, and smoke, but now your journey takes a turn. Not forward exactly, but sideways, into a stranger place, a quieter battlefield, a shape war. You wouldn't think a simple tool like a paperclip would have factions, rivalries, and heated design debates. But oh, it does. And the battleground? Geometry. Specifically the battle between the gem and the Gothic. You're in a modest office now, maybe 1950s suburban America. You smell linoleum and old coffee, you hear the clack of typewriter keys and the murmur of business jargon, and you're watching someone reach into their desk drawer, rummage around, and pull out a box of paper clips. Two different kinds, side by side. On the left, the gem clip, all smooth curves and confident loops, symmetrical, sleek, the standard bearer of the form. On the right, the Gothic clip, austere, angled, a sort of rectangular pretzel that looks like it was designed by someone who distrusted curves. You hold both in your hand now like a sleepy, slightly confused curator of stationary history. One feels friendly, the other feels like it wants to audit your taxes. The gem clip, the one we think of as the paper clip, had no US patent but dominated the market through sheer elegance. The Gothic clip, meanwhile, was patented by Cushman and Dennison in the early 20th century. It was angular, harsh, and, to be fair, somewhat more secure on thicker stacks of paper, like a stapler that went to etiquette school. There's a reason both persisted. The gem is great for everyday use, but the Gothic has its partisans, especially in archival and legal circles. You might call it the paperclip equivalent of preferring black coffee over a latte. Practical, slightly severe, possibly sociopathic. Historians still argue whether the Gothic was a deliberate stylistic rebellion against the gem's dominance or simply a manufacturing decision. After all, bending wire into straight lines is mechanically simpler than creating smooth ovals. But as with most things in life, what starts as logistics turns into aesthetics. People started having opinions. In a world before minimalist design blogs and Instagram-worthy desk setups, this was the closest you got to design drama in the workplace. Clerks would grumble about which clip was proper. Some refused to use the Gothic on principle. Others hoarded the gem clips like rationed sugar. You can imagine an office worker slipping one gem into their breast pocket like a subtle protest, a tiny revolution against the tyranny of angularity. And then there were the fringe factions. You leaf through an old office catalog and spot a glorious menagerie of alternate clip designs. Some with double loops, some shaped like fishhooks, one shaped like a miniature pretzel tied by a distracted engineer. These clips were niche, marketed to specialists, accountants, engineers, perhaps origami enthusiasts with a grudge. There was even one dubbed the ideal clip, which looked like a tiny coil spring ready to attack your documents with the enthusiasm of a caffeinated squirrel. It never caught on, probably for the best. A quirky tidbit for your nearly sleeping brain: there was a Niagara clip, shaped like a river bend, and a Concorde clip, which sounds like it should come with complimentary airline peanuts. These brands popped up briefly and vanished, like seasonal flavors of stationery. But despite all these competitors, the gem remained king. And here's where things get deliciously ironic. Despite being the dominant form, no one really owned the design. That meant any manufacturer could produce gem-style clips without paying licensing fees. It was the open source hero of its time. Meanwhile, those who tried to patent new shapes often failed to get market traction. Turns out, most people don't want their documents held together by something that looks like an alien life form. You watch the rivalry slowly fade. The Gothic clip survives as a sort of bureaucratic relic, used more for nostalgia or by stubborn archivists than practicality. The others dissolve into obscurity, occasionally turning up in dusty desk drawers or forgotten filing cabinets like fossils of a lost paper age. And yet, if you listen closely to the rustle of paperwork, you can still hear the echoes of the shape war. Someone somewhere is still muttering, "Ah, I hate the square ones." Now, let's zoom in on one detail you probably never noticed: the slight inward curl at the tips of a gem clip. It's subtle, but it's the reason it doesn't scratch, snag, or snaggle your documents. A tiny, thoughtful bend that made all the difference. One designer's gentle touch, permanently altering how millions of fingers interact with paper. And while we're at it, there's another mystery lurking in the bend: the tension. You press the clip open between thumb and finger. There's resistance, just enough, not too much. That's spring tension, created purely by the geometry of the bend, not by any springs or parts. You've held this miracle of tension thousands of times and never once gave it a standing ovation. So let's pause briefly in the warm hum of this imaginary office and give it that ovation. Not loud, just respectful. Of course, design has always shaped history, sometimes dramatically, like Gutenberg's press, sometimes quietly, like the gem clip. You can draw a direct line from its shape to its adoption rate, to its market dominance, to its eventual embedding in culture. Without its perfect little spiral, would the paperclip have risen to power? Probably not. The Gothic might have reigned, or some horrible tri-pronged claw from the patent graveyard, but the fit in drawers, in fingers, in folders, in time, and so it won. You tuck the clip back into the drawer and shut it softly. The design war is over. The victor remains humble, but ever present. You'll see it again, maybe tomorrow, maybe in a decade, maybe at the bottom of a box you forgot you packed in college. And when you do, you'll remember that once, in the soft middle of the 20th century, a quiet civil war played out across desk drawers worldwide. No shots were fired, but paper was securely fastened. You step away from the shape wars, gently closing that metaphorical desk drawer, only to find yourself face to face with a problem that refuses to be clipped shut: the question of who actually invented the paperclip. If you're expecting a clear answer, I have news. You won't survive this timeline. You're now drifting through a hall of mirrors made entirely of patents, claims, counterclaims, and mild confusion. A bureaucrat's fever dream, a historian's migraine. The kind of mess that can only exist when something so simple turns out to have too many fathers and no birth certificate. Let's start with the man most commonly, though incorrectly, credited with inventing the paperclip, Johann Wahler. He's Norwegian, he's earnest, and in 1899 he filed a patent in Germany for a device designed to hold sheets of paper together. You squint at the drawing. It's almost a paperclip, but not quite. Wahler's design lacks the inner loop that gives the modern gem clip its grip and grace. Imagine someone tried to recreate a paperclip from memory using cooked spaghetti. That's Wahler's clip. Still, decades later, Norway embraces him as the father of the paperclip, mostly out of national pride. Textbooks sing his praises, sculptures are erected, office supply companies beam with patriotic glee. But, and here comes the awkward whisper, historians eventually dig up some hard truths. Wahler's design was never manufactured, never sold. And by the time he patented it, the gem clip was already quietly thriving in Britain. In fact, the gem manufacturing company had likely been making the real deal since the early 1890s, before Wahler even started doodling. But here's the kicker. Gem never patented their clip design. They patented the machine to make it, not the shape itself. That little oversight opened the floodgates for confusion and imitation. You walk through a fog of patents now, all slightly different, all claiming to improve the same basic thing: bending wire to hold paper. Some are rectangles, others are triangles. One has teeth, another looks suspiciously like a tiny metal saxophone. You come across William Middlebrook, an American who filed a patent in 1899, not for the clip, but for a machine that churned them out by the thousands. His machine produced the gem shape, further muddying the waters. Did he invent it, or just automate someone else's design? Historians still argue over this. Some say Middlebrook and the gem company may have collaborated. Others insist Middlebrook reverse-engineered what was already floating around. The records are hazy. The truth is slippery. And this is where the paperclip reveals something oddly profound. Sometimes invention isn't a single flash of brilliance. Sometimes it's a slow seep, a cultural ooze, a dozen minds bending wire in garages, in shops, in factories, each arriving at a similar solution, unaware of each other. The collective unconscious rendered in mild steel. You wander further into the patent archives, real or imagined, who knows at this hour, and find names like Herbert Spencer, Cornelius Brosnan, and even a curious claim from someone in Connecticut who tried to patent a clip with a built-in pencil sharpener. Ambition meets chaos. One particularly odd entry from 1920 claims to have improved the clipping functionality of previous paper-retaining devices by introducing a dual-axis pressure curve. Translation: they made it slightly more annoying to use. You sit down for a moment on a filing cabinet, now half dreaming. Your head buzzes with images of workshops, dusty tools, men in waistcoats arguing over curvature tolerances. All this for something you buy in bulk for $2 and lose constantly. Let's inject a bit of whimsy since your brain is already melting. Somewhere in the 1930s, there were rumors, never confirmed, of a paperclip that doubled as a whistle. No one can produce one. No patent exists. But oh, the idea lingers. A clip that sings, the kind of thing that might appear in a Wes Anderson film about tax accountants. Meanwhile, back in the real world, manufacturers lean into the chaos. Since no one owns the gem shape, they all produce it. Bins and drawers and boxes of nearly identical paper clips flood the market. Some are copper-coated, some are color-dipped. Some try to be fancy by arriving in tiny, clear plastic cubes as if they're designer earrings. But deep down, they're all the same, because you can't really improve perfection. You can only pretend. You pass a modern office now, glass walls, ergonomic chairs, the faint hum of a printer someone forgot to unjam. On a desk lies a paperclip holding two sheets of printer paper together. It's not labeled, not traced, no patent number, no history book entry, and yet it carries a century of anonymous genius in its coils. There's a strange kind of beauty in that, because unlike so many inventions that have clear birthdays and bold inventors, the paperclip was quietly born in the margins. It emerged almost accidentally out of necessity and evolution, a slow spiral of trial and error folded into the metal itself. No fanfare, just function. And that's perhaps why it lasted. Not because someone claimed it, but because no one really could. You run your finger along its smooth loop one more time before setting it down. It's not asking for credit. It never did. You leave the confusion of patents behind, still ringing in your ears like the echo of 100 whispered arguments, and step into a different kind of noise, softer, more rhythmic. It's the shuffle of paper, the tick of clock hands, the sigh of a tired secretary reaching for the third time that day to reclip a stack of forms that refuse to behave. Welcome to the golden age of office work. You're in the 1950s now, mid-century modern everything. Blonde wood desks, rotary phones, ashtrays that never seem to get emptied, fluorescent lights buzz overhead like a swarm of polite hornets. And beneath all that, there it is again, the paperclip. Silent. Essential. You wouldn't call it glamorous, but it's everywhere. You watch an office clerk, a real everyman in a beige shirt, slide a clip over a purchase order. Another secures a report before heading into a long meeting. A third reuses the same clip he's had since 1948, slightly bent but still loyal. The paperclip is the office's quiet glue, binding memos, letters, invoices, lunch menus, reprimands, apologies, and dreams. It's funny, isn't it? How something so mundane became so universal without anyone really noticing. Here's a mainstream historical fact to ground you in the paper-laden terrain. By the late 1950s, the US was producing billions of paperclips annually. Billions. With a B. Enough to stretch around the earth several times if laid end to end, which no one ever does, of course. But it's comforting to imagine a cold steel wire trail weaving its way across continents like some oddly bureaucratic ley line. The post-war economy is booming. Offices multiply like mushrooms after rain, and so do paperclips. They're packed into drawers alongside typewriter ribbons, correction fluid, and that strange office smell that's equal parts paper dust and existential dread. You walk past a receptionist's desk and catch sight of a ceramic dish filled entirely with clips. No label, no explanation, just a bowl of potential. That bowl has been refilled dozens of times and yet never truly emptied, like a Zen fountain but for stationery. In another room, someone's meticulously unbending clips to use as makeshift tools. One's propping open a drawer that won't stay closed. Another's holding the corner of a nameplate to the wall. A third has been shoved into a jammed button on the office coffee machine. Quirky tidbit incoming. During this era, the paperclip tie clip becomes a legitimate fashion statement. Briefly. Office workers, either out of convenience or mild rebellion, start using large paperclips to hold their ties in place. It's not formal, it's not endorsed by the style gods, but it's practical. And for about 3 months in 1961, it's even considered kind of cool before falling right back into the awkward oblivion from which it came. Back in the main office, you notice something else. The ritual of it all. The way people unbend, bend back, and unbend again. The nervous fiddling during meetings, the clicking, the straightening. You realize the paperclip isn't just functional, it's tactile. It does something for the hands. A companion in moments of corporate boredom and low-key anxiety. There's one man in the corner who has arranged an entire sculpture out of clips, a miniature Eiffel Tower, complete with arches. You want to say something, but he's busy pretending it's a prototype for a document verticalizing apparatus. He may be onto something, or he may need a vacation. Another historical detail, slightly sad. Paperclips were one of the few items not subject to significant redesign despite advances in materials. Plastic versions appeared, coated ones too, but they never caught on in the same way. The steel remained king. Plastic clips bent awkwardly, broke easily, or lacked the tension needed to do the job. In a world obsessed with reinvention, the paperclip remained stubbornly, beautifully unchanged. Some manufacturers tried to spice things up. Heart-shaped clips for Valentine's memos, star clips for awards, even dollar sign clips for motivational seminars. Most of them faded into obscurity, tucked away in novelty bins and forgotten boardrooms. The gem always returned, always reliable, always slightly smug about it. You walk past another desk and notice a pile of clipped-together mail. The clip is old, maybe oxidized. It leaves a faint smudge on the paper. The person sighs, replaces it with a newer one, and tosses the old clip into a jar labeled retired. You nod with approval. Even paper clips deserve a quiet retirement. Here's another peculiar thought. Most people don't buy paper clips very often. Once you have a box, it lasts forever. They migrate, they disappear, they return. They live in desk drawers, under car seats, inside coat pockets, and occasionally in the lint trap of your dryer. It's almost spiritual, the way they come back. And in that way, the paperclip quietly colonized every office, every school, every bureaucratic space on the planet. Not through advertising, not through marketing genius, just utility. You don't think about it, you don't question it, you just reach for it. A final thought as you drift into the late afternoon hum of this imaginary office. If aliens ever dug through our ruins, what would they make of the paperclip? Would they assume it was currency, a religious symbol, a skeletal artifact of some strange creature, or would they figure it out? You smile. Somehow, you hope they never do. You're still in the office, but the mood has shifted. The coffee's gone cold. The fluorescent lights have been humming just a bit too long. The filing cabinets groan like tired elephants. Welcome to the deep end of the paper world. This isn't about idle note clipping anymore. No, this is bureaucracy. And the paperclip, it's now the linchpin of empires. You stroll through the corridors of a government records office circa 1973. The walls are a sickly institutional beige. The smell is must and toner. Someone's coughing into a sleeve in the distance. You look left, stacks of case files clipped together. You look right, more files. It's like a paper ocean, and the only thing keeping it from collapsing is that small, reliable twist of wire. Paperclips aren't just holding documents anymore, they're holding systems. You watch as a clerk, bleary-eyed and surrounded by mountains of forms, calmly assembles a report. He doesn't think, doesn't pause. Just clip, slide, stack, stamp. It's a trance, like a monk copying scripture. But instead of divine insight, it's 3 copies of Form 289B detailing the purchase of 3 snow tires by a mid-level civil servant in Topeka. This is where the paperclip becomes not just useful, but vital. Because filing systems, real physical ones, require fasteners. Staples are too permanent. Binder clips are bulky. Folders are expensive. But a paperclip? That's cheap, reusable, forgiving. When your paperwork grows, it stretches. When you make a mistake, it lets go. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the 1960s and 70s, major bureaucratic institutions like the IRS and Social Security Administration processed millions of documents per month. Most of them weren't stapled. They were clipped. Paperclips became the nervous system of bureaucratic life. And while it might sound boring, it's actually a bit poetic. That tiny tool made scale possible. You couldn't run a government or a large corporation without some way to bundle, unbundle, and rebundle again. The paperclip wasn't a convenience. It was infrastructure. Now, for your quirky detail. In the mid-20th century, NASA, yes, NASA, used paperclips in their spacecraft mock-ups. Not as actual components, thankfully, but as placeholders during prototyping, testing how documents, materials, and modular instructions could be packaged in microgravity. Somewhere, floating inside a pressurized cabin simulator, was a paperclip doing its best to hold together humanity's dreams of the stars. But down on Earth, it was doing something much less glamorous, like helping deliver subpoenas. You enter a courtroom backroom where legal assistants frantically prepare for a case. There's a brief about a land dispute, a deposition from a bank executive, a notarized statement from a woman who insists the tree was clearly on her property. None of it would make sense if the pages weren't in order. And what's holding them in order? Not a binder, not a folder, a clip. Law offices became havens of paperclip culture. Precision mattered. A misplaced page could doom a case. A stapled document couldn't be rearranged easily. The paperclip? Swift, silent, surgical. You begin to notice the subtle hierarchy of clip placement. Left top corner for standard docs, center top for interoffice memos, double clipped if the clerk doesn't trust the reader. There's even a rumored angry clip used when someone sends a passive-aggressive memo, typically attached with aggressive force and rotated slightly askew. Historians still argue whether the explosion of paperwork in the late 20th century was a sign of efficiency or dysfunction. Some claim it enabled accountability and transparency. Others call it the Great Swamp, the endless multiplication of documents to obscure meaning. But they all agree on this. The only reason it functioned at all was because someone kept it organized. And more often than not, that someone used a paperclip. Even in intelligence agencies, places where nothing is what it seems, the clip played its part. Files marked confidential or eyes only were often bundled not in fancy folders but with simple clips. Easy to separate, easy to rearrange, easy to burn. Sometimes the humblest tools are the most adaptable. You pause at a shelf labeled closed files. Rows of manila folders sleep peacefully in their dusty nests. There's comfort in knowing that beneath the layers of red tape, bureaucracy, and institutional madness, something so tiny made it all manageable. You even spot an old training video on VHS, circa 1984, titled Clipping It Right, Best Practices in Document Assembly. A bored-looking man in a tie explains how improperly attached clips can lead to document loss, tension damage, or what he dramatically calls unauthorized disassembly. It's riveting in the dullest way possible, and yet kind of soothing. There's a meditative rhythm in all of it, the soft click of the clip sliding on, the whisper of reordered pages, the quiet competence of doing something correctly, even when it's small. Here's a sleepy brain treat. There was a janitor at a Midwest insurance office in the 70s who collected every dropped paperclip he found and made a chain over 15 feet long. No one asked him to. He just did it. When he retired, they framed it like a piece of modern art, which, in a way, it was. You leave the building now, trailing the scent of copy toner and aging manila. You glance down. A paperclip is stuck to your shoe. You don't remember picking it up. It's just there, like it always is. And you realize something. The paperclip isn't just useful, it's ceremonial. It's the last gentle gesture before a report is complete. It's the thing you do right before passing a document to someone else, signaling, I've made this ready for you. It's a form of care. Because in the endless, mind-numbing churn of bureaucracy, a little care goes a long way. You emerge from the government records office like a spelunker crawling out of a cave lined with carbon copies and stapled shame. The sun is gentler now, the air is cooler. You've wandered past bureaucracy and into the realm of everyday life, where the paperclip lives not in policy, but in pockets. This is domestic territory now. Kitchens, school bags, glove compartments, the quiet corners of life where things get lost and found again. You're in a 1980s kitchen. There's a phone mounted to the wall, its cord twisting like a sleeping python. A bulletin board covered in coupons, takeout menus, and school forms sits next to it. You guessed it, everything's held in place by paperclips. Some are bent, some are rusted. All of them have lived multiple lives. A to-do list hangs there. Groceries, dentist, call Janet. It's yellowed, slightly torn, but the clip keeps it dignified. This is the paperclip at its most humble. It's no longer part of the grand machine of governance. It's in the junk drawer, nestled between a stray battery, 2 rubber bands, and a birthday candle shaped like the number 6. And yet, it still matters. You drift into a classroom now, circa 1992. Plastic chairs, chalk dust, posters of whales and multiplication tables. A teacher rummages in her desk drawer and pulls out a jam jar full of paper clips. No box, no brand name, just a glass container full of possibility. You watch a student quietly take one from the jar, not for paper, but for mischief. He bends it. He bends it into a tiny fishing hook for the classroom goldfish tank. It doesn't work, but the fish seem intrigued. Quirky tidbit time. Kids have used paper clips for generations to reset electronics, early calculators, handheld games, even the occasional Tamagotchi in distress. Paperclip as defibrillator. You can almost hear the digital chirp of life restarting. The paperclip also becomes a tool of teen rebellion, lockpicking, gum wrapper launching, secret note passing. In one school, a kid used a chain of paperclips to lower a message from the second floor window to a friend below. Did you do the math? It was intercepted. Detention ensued. Worth it. Historians still argue whether these spontaneous household repurposings were acts of creativity or simply the inevitable result of everyone having too many paperclips. But one thing is clear, by the end of the 20th century, the paperclip had become the Swiss Army knife of the average home. You step into a garage now. A father is cursing quietly as he tries to reattach the springs in a broken toaster. His fingers fumble. Then instinctively he reaches for the little magnetic tray on the workbench. There it is, a paperclip bent into a temporary pin. Not ideal. Not safe, but effective enough to toast 2 slices of bread before the thing finally gives out in a small puff of smoke and defiance. Even in the glove compartment of the family car, the clip waits. It holds together old insurance documents, faded receipts, a map of the county from 1985. It's there for emergencies, though no one ever says what kind. Emotional, maybe. By the 2000s, the paperclip has become so mundane that it begins to take on symbolic weight. Minimalist thinkers love it. Designers use it as a metaphor for efficiency. Writers use it as a metaphor for, well, everything. You've probably seen a novel where the cover is just a single paperclip on a white background. That's art now. One strange twist, pun fully intended, is that in 2001, a Canadian named Kyle MacDonald decided to trade a red paperclip for something better. Literally, he started with one red paperclip and through a series of trades, paperclip for pen, pen for doorknob, doorknob for camp stove, and so on, eventually ended up with a house, a real house in Saskatchewan. It took 14 trades, it made headlines, it made history. You're not hallucinating. A man bartered a bent piece of metal into property ownership. Try explaining that to a mortgage lender. It became a story about creativity, about value, about how small things, if treated with imagination, can lead to improbable outcomes. Suddenly, the paperclip was cool again. Briefly, but beautifully. Back in your own imaginary space, you glance down and see a bowl on your kitchen counter. Your bowl. It wasn't always for paperclips. It was for mints once, maybe loose change. Now it's full of odd little coils, each one telling a story. This one's from a wedding program. That one came from the vet's office. This one still smells faintly of lavender and tax season. And that one, that bent, misshapen one, you used it to push the tiny reset button on your router. Twice. They're like fossils, these clips. Timeline markers in the sediment of daily life. A few of them are tangled together now, like they've formed some kind of metallic friendship. You smile. Even paperclips seek company. Here's a final sleepy thought for tonight's domestic tour. The paperclip might be the only object that has quietly occupied nearly every space in your life. From your backpack to your bank to your bathroom drawer, it travels with you, unnoticed, uninvited, but always welcome. It doesn't beep, doesn't buzz, doesn't need charging. It asks for nothing, and yet it's there, waiting to hold something for you, something important, or more often, something you'll forget about by next week. But still, the paperclip holds. You're standing at the intersection of the analog world and the digital frontier now. The late 1990s, the early 2000s, a time of transition, of dial-up modems screaming into the void, of clunky monitors glowing like miniature suns, and of one very infamous paperclip making its pixelated debut. You know exactly who's coming. Yes, Clippy. He arrives uninvited, cheerfully peeking out from the side of your screen, pupils wobbling like caffeinated jelly beans. "It looks like you're writing a letter," he chirps. "Would you like help with that?" And just like that, the humble paperclip enters the digital age. But not quietly. You're sitting at your Windows 98 desktop. The tower hums beneath your desk. The glow from the CRT monitor reflects off a plastic-wrapped keyboard. And there he is, Clippy, with his arched wire frame and those unsettlingly expressive eyes, blinking at you like a nervous intern who's just been told to run the entire meeting. Clippy wasn't just a novelty. He was part of Microsoft Office Assistant, designed to make the increasingly complex word interface more friendly, more human. The idea was noble. The execution, well, let's just say historians still argue whether Clippy was a visionary attempt at user support or a fever dream from which tech has only recently recovered. Quirky tidbit? Clippy's full name was Clippit, and his creators at Microsoft's research division genuinely believed he'd revolutionize user interaction. His personality was based on social interface theory, suggesting that users responded better to digital help when it had a face and presumably googly eyes. Unfortunately, Clippy's timing was poor. Users didn't want help writing their grocery lists or angry resignation letters. They certainly didn't want to be interrupted every time they typed "dear." And so Clippy quickly became the most hated assistant in computing history. You watch as someone clicks close again and again and again. But even as he earned the ire of millions, Clippy became a cultural icon, parodied in TV shows, immortalized in memes. He crossed into the strange hall of fame reserved for things we love to hate, the new Coke of productivity software, the Jar Jar Binks of Microsoft Office. You walk past a cubicle. Someone has a Clippy mug. Ironic. probably, or sincere. It's hard to tell anymore. Like most things from that era, Clippy was both earnest and excruciating. But underneath the blinking animations and chirpy pop-ups, there's something oddly touching. Clippy represented the paperclip's attempt to stay relevant in a world no longer built from paper. Because let's face it, by the 2000s, paper was starting to fade. Emails replaced memos, PDFs replaced printouts, cloud storage replaced filing cabinets, and slowly, subtly, the world began to reach for paperclips a little less. You open a drawer in a modern office. Inside, there's a half-used box of clips with yellowed edges. The lid's gone. A few clips are tangled together like a forgot nest. You wonder when the last time someone used one was. Still, the paperclip wasn't done yet. Even in a paperless world, it adapted. It became metaphor. Designers use the icon to represent attachments in email programs. A tiny loop of wire, and now digitized, became shorthand for something important is tucked in here. That shape, those familiar curves, migrated from desk drawers into interface bars, from steel to pixels. You watch as someone drags a file into an email. The paperclip icon appears instantly, silently confirming the action. No mess, no interruptions, no googly eyes. And here's a gentle irony. Even though Clippy was retired by Microsoft in the early 2000s, officially killed off in 2007 with the arrival of Office 2007, his symbolic presence lingered. The paperclip icon remained, leaner, quieter, free of personality, but still loyal. It's almost poetic. The object that once held papers together now holds files, and people remember, fondly even. There are Clippy tattoos, Clippy plush toys, limited edition stickers. In 2021, Microsoft briefly brought him back as an emoji replacement, just for fun. A nod to the past, a wink to those who grew up under his twitchy gaze, because even when mocked, the paperclip endures. You walk past a teenager's laptop, they're writing a script. Clippy's not there anymore, but the paperclip icon is, smiling quietly from the corner of their screen. A helper, no longer intrusive, just present. That's what the paperclip has always been, really. Present, waiting, ready. And if you zoom out just a little, you realize something odd. The paperclip is one of the very few physical items that successfully made the leap into digital culture without being redesigned, renamed, or replaced. It's not a metaphor of something else. It is the metaphor. It holds the abstract together, just as it held the physical. So even as the stacks of paper vanish, even as document trays empty and printers grow dusty, the paperclip survives. Bent metal, reborn in code. A whisper from the analog world in a universe increasingly made of light. You've stepped out of the office now, out of the home, out of the screen, and for a moment you might think you've left the paperclip behind, but you haven't, because the paperclip doesn't just live in drawers, files, or on your desktop. No, it's wandered further, slipped into art, fashion, protest, memory. It's become symbol, sculpture, statement, still quiet, still humble, but somehow louder than ever. You're walking into a gallery now, modern, white-walled, and echoing faintly with that sound of your own footsteps on polished floors. On one pedestal stands a sculpture, giant, looping, cold steel, recognizably a paperclip, magnified to absurd proportions. It's titled Fastener of Empires. You suppress a chuckle. But the artist isn't joking. The piece is meant to represent the connective tissue of civilization, the little thing that holds the bigger things together. Documents, laws, histories, wars, taxes, love letters, all bound briefly and beautifully by this small shape of bent wire. It's not the only one. You walk into another room, photographs of paper clips bent into letters, messages. One clip twisted into a heart, another into a treble clef. One particularly poignant image shows a rusted paperclip holding together the pages of a handwritten wartime journal, the metal barely hanging on. Which brings us to a powerful truth you may have overlooked until now. The paperclip is a symbol of resistance. Let's return to Norway. Remember Valor, the maybe inventor who wasn't quite? Well, even if his design wasn't perfect, his legacy became something more. During World War II, when Nazi Germany occupied Norway, overt symbols of resistance, flags, slogans, even national colors were banned. So Norwegians turned to the paperclip. Why? Because it bound things together. An ordinary object became code. Unity, solidarity, defiance. People began wearing paper clips on their lapels, discreetly, subtly, daringly, a quiet protest, a whisper in metal. At first, the occupiers were baffled, then threatened, The wearing of paperclips was outlawed, but the message had already spread. A mainstream historical fact: tens of thousands of Norwegians wore paperclips in secret. A whole resistance movement bound together, literally and figuratively, by this humble office supply. That's not just metaphor, that's bravery. And it didn't stop there. You walk now into a high school classroom in Tennessee, sometime around the year 2000. A history teacher, wanting to help students grasp the scale of the Holocaust, suggests collecting 6 million paperclips, one for each life lost. It starts small, a few hundred clips in a jar. Then the story spreads. Letters arrive, boxes, envelopes filled with clips from around the world. The project goes viral in a pre-viral age. Within a few years, students collect over 30 million paperclips. A memorial is built using an old rail car once used to transport Jews to concentration camps. The clips are displayed inside, a quiet avalanche of remembrance. You pause at the door of that rail car, your eyes adjusting to the dim interior. It's filled with paperclips. Each one once bent, dropped, touched, sent. Each one representing a life, a memory, a lesson. And you realize maybe the paperclip isn't just about holding things together. Maybe it's about remembering what we hold on to. Back in the art world, you stumble upon a fashion runway photo from 1994, a dress designed entirely out of paper clips. Glamorous, maybe? Practical? Not remotely. But it's striking, a mesh of cold elegance, a commentary perhaps on fragility and tension. Quirky tidbit? A punk band in the 80s once made a necklace entirely from industrial-sized paper clips and called it bureaucratic bling. It broke mid-set. No one cared. Elsewhere, in quiet rebellion, students still wear paperclips as subtle statements. LGBTQ+ youth have used rainbow paperclips to signal safety. Activists have used them to mark papers with messages hidden within, whisper protests in steel curves. You even find poetry. A short piece by a Canadian poet: "I found your letter folded tight, held by a clip with a little bite. Not love, not loss, but just enough to keep the pages from coming unstuck." No prizes, no awards, but it lingers with you because there's something deeply human in using something so simple to say something so big. And now, in the age of disposable everything, where digital has eaten paper and most messages vanish after a swipe, the paperclip endures, not just in use, but in spirit. Artists still sculpt with them, protesters still pin them, lovers still use them to hold notes together, kids still straighten them into swords, hackers still use them to eject stuck SIM trays. Poets still find metaphor in their loops, and history, yes, even the boring kind, still unfolds beneath their silent, tensile grip. It's not that the paperclip refuses to die, it's that it never needed to shout to live. It adapts, it reflects, it waits. A survivor, a symbol, a shape you could draw in the dark with your eyes closed, and you probably have. You're in a place you can't quite name now. It's not a classroom, not an office, not a kitchen, courtroom, gallery, or inbox. It's somewhere in between, a kind of museum of memory. The air is quiet here, still, like a library where no one needs to whisper anymore. And scattered all around you, on shelves, behind glass, tucked into drawers, are paperclips. Just paperclips. But as you move through the space, you begin to realize these aren't just objects. They're bookmarks in people's lives. Each one part of a story, a decision, a mistake, a routine, a breakthrough. One clip holds a torn theater ticket from a date that didn't go well, but somehow led to a second. Another is curled around a yellowing photo of someone's grandfather, taken in 1952, smiling outside a tax office. You find a clip that's been twisted into the shape of a heart, and another that's perfectly straight, like it just decided it didn't want to be a paperclip anymore. This is where the paperclip really lives, in the in-between moments, the nearly forgotten ones, the ones too small to write down but too important to lose. You lean against a cabinet now, and here's your mainstream historical fact, one that feels especially relevant in this room: the gem paperclip design, that iconic double-looped shape we all know and lose constantly, has never been patented. It was first made in Britain sometime in the late 19th century by the Gem Manufacturing Company. But for reasons still debated, they never secured a patent for the design itself, only the machine to make it. Historians still argue why. Maybe they thought it wasn't worth protecting. Maybe they believed no one would bother copying it. Or maybe, just maybe, they understood something few inventors ever do, that real utility doesn't need ownership. And so the paperclip spread quietly, Without a logo, without a slogan, without an ad campaign or a marketing budget, no celebrity endorsements, no Super Bowl halftime shows, just usefulness. It's almost unnerving how democratic it is, how available. Anyone can make one, anyone can use one. They're in offices, schools, police stations, interrogation rooms, wedding chapels, funeral homes, jail cells, submarines. They don't discriminate, they don't judge. You lift a small card from one of the museum shelves. It's clipped to a drawing, a child's sketch of a dragon, scrawled in purple crayon, wings far too small for the body. In the corner, written in clumsy block letters, is "For Dad." The clip holding the card is bent, worn, and slightly rusted. You put it back gently. Now for your quirky tidbit. In 2017, a group of Swedish researchers tried to calculate how many paper clips a single average office worker might use over a lifetime. Their estimate, around 11,000 clips. Not 10,000, not 12, 11. And the number sounds oddly personal, like they weren't just counting usage, they were measuring personality. You imagine someone carefully logging each clip, each stack, each report, each moment of fidgeting during long meetings. A secret history of attention spans. You sit down now, the floor creaks. Your hands brush against a book. Blank pages, but the corners are clipped. Someone started a story here, or meant to, or couldn't finish. The paperclip is still holding space, like a sentry guarding silence. There's something about that shape, that loop. It feels human somehow. The curve that holds, the bend that adapts, the pressure that resists just enough to keep things in place, but never so much that you can't undo it. You think about other inventions, the grand ones, engines, rockets, computers, revolutionary, necessary, loud, but they're not with you. Not like this. You've never held a jet engine in your pocket. You've never carried a nuclear reactor in your wallet. But the paperclip, you've probably got one on you right now. Bent, forgotten, ready. And in some strange way, it's always been there. You look up at the shelves one last time before standing. Some of the clips are gold-plated, some are rainbow-colored. A few are twisted into things that don't quite make sense. Abstract art, nervous habits, accidents, who knows? But they're all still doing what they were meant to do. Holding on. Not forever. Not tightly. Just long enough. Long enough for you to figure it out. Long enough for the papers to matter. Long enough for the moment to pass. You're moving again. Out of memory, out of metaphor, and into the deep end of utility. You find yourself in the workshop now. Tools hang from the walls like sleeping bats. The scent of oil, dust, and old ambition lingers in the air. It's the kind of place where improvisation thrives, where nothing is ever really broken, just waiting to be fixed. And the paperclip? It's the unofficial MVP of this realm. You spot a man at a bench, poking at a jammed cassette deck. He frowns, looks around, then reaches instinctively, not for pliers, not for a soldering iron, but for a paperclip. He straightens it with practiced ease and delicately inserts it into the recessed reset button on the back. Click. Music returns. A hiss, then a guitar riff. Problem solved. Clip slightly bent, slightly heroic. This is where the paperclip truly shines, not in organization, but in adaptation, because it turns out the paperclip is more than a fastener. It's a tool, a pick, a shim, a lock bypass, a circuit jumper, a miniature lever, a universal key for everything you weren't supposed to open. There's an entire world of paperclip-based life hacks you probably already know. But watching them all play out one after the other is like walking through a strange, low-budget magic show. In one corner, someone's using a paperclip to eject a stuck CD tray. In another, a clip becomes a stand-in SIM card pin. Someone else is crafting makeshift hooks to retrieve a dropped earring from under a floorboard. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Even NASA, cautious and hyper-precise as it is, has used paperclips in space, not as structural components, obviously, but in emergency improvisation. During the Skylab missions of the 1970s, paperclips were repurposed to help with minor repairs and adjustments inside the station. The toolbox of last resort, they called it. A collection of rubber bands, duct tape, and paperclips. Now for a peculiar gem. Legend has it that Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple and minimalist design guru, was once spotted using a paperclip to clean gunk from his keyboard, carefully, with the precision of a monk brushing sand from stone. No confirmation, of course, but the image endures. Historians still argue whether the modern obsession with hacking and DIY began with things like Swiss Army knives or if it began earlier when kids first bent a paperclip to fix a Walkman. You watch as someone makes a phone stand using just two clips and a rubber band. It holds against all logic. Another uses three clips to hang a broken zipper back on a coat. You've got one in your memory too. Some moment when you MacGyvered your way out of a crisis with nothing but thin metal and raw determination. And if you didn't call it genius at the time, you should now. But it's not just tech and tinkering. There's an elegance to the paperclip's shape that lends itself to invention. You stroll into a science classroom now. A teacher is showing how electromagnets work using a battery, some copper wire, and, you guessed it, a paperclip as the magnetic target. The class gasps as it jumps. Simple, clean, quietly magical. There's even a subset of engineers and designers who keep one paperclip on their desk, not for use, but as a symbol. A reminder that good design is small, durable, elegant, and endlessly functional. You find one such designer now, sketching on a tablet. She pauses, sips tea, and absently rolls a clip between her fingers. It calms her, grounds her. It's part fidget toy, part muse. And somewhere in another building, someone's using a paperclip to press the recessed pair button on a smart home device. Just like someone else used it 50 years ago to reset a cassette. Just like someone will use it 50 years from now on some new technology that still somehow requires a tiny poke. There's something deeply satisfying about that consistency, that quiet permanence. Like the paperclip is whispering, whatever breaks, I'll try to help. And help it does, because the paperclip doesn't pretend to be what it's not. It doesn't overreach. It doesn't require charging. It doesn't upgrade, crash, or come with monthly fees. It just adapts. Sometimes poorly, sometimes brilliantly, but always, always with a kind of unspoken loyalty. There's a section in the back of the workshop. It's where the truly odd uses of paperclips live. You see a clip turned into a fishing hook, another bent into a tiny compass needle. One's been used as a guitar string bridge in a pinch. Another, a stand-in fuse in a fuse box. A terrible idea, by the way, but desperate times, etc. These aren't life hacks, they're life patches. Emergency measures, tiny acts of resistance against entropy, and in each case, the paperclip does what it can. Not because it was designed to, but because it can. You pocket one now, not for any specific task, just in case. Because who knows? Something might break, something might need holding, something might just need a gentle prod from a small bent piece of wire that's been silently helping humans fix things for over 100 years. And now it's with you. Ready. You find yourself in quieter company now, somewhere less practical, more philosophical. The workshop is behind you, its scent of oil and invention fading. Ahead lies something softer, a place of reflection, of meaning, of why we even bother holding things together in the first place. You're walking through a library, not the public kind with neon posters and overdue fees. No, this is the old kind. Dust in the air, leather bindings, wooden ladders that creak when you climb them, lamps with golden light pooling in circles on thick carpets. Silence, not as a rule, but as an atmosphere. And on nearly every desk tucked between pages of old texts, you spot them again. Paperclips, bent slightly, pressed gently over pages, serving not as bookmarks, but as anchors, indicators of significance, memory holders, invisible underliners that whisper, this matters. They're not doing much, but they are doing something. You pause beside a stack of books and consider this. The paperclip may be one of the last purely analog tools that people still use out of preference, not necessity. No power required, no setup, no learning curve. You just know what it does the moment you hold it. Historians still argue whether the paperclip's longevity is due to its function or its form, whether it endures because it works or because it feels right. There's something about that curve, that loop, that subtle give and take tension between wire and paper. Designers call it tactile empathy. The way something feels in your hand matches what your brain expects it to do. It's not just utility, it's understanding. Quirky tidbit? There are academic papers, peer-reviewed papers, about the paperclip's design elegance. One architecture professor once called it the quiet ideal of object minimalism, and another described it as a metaphorical Mobius strip of containment and freedom. Neither of them were joking. In a world obsessed with disruption, here is an object that has never changed because it never needed to. You walk into the philosophy aisle now. Books with titles like On the Nature of Order, Objects in Thought, and The Secret Life of Inanimate Things. And here's a thought. The paperclip is an object that's never tried to be more than it is, and perhaps that's why it continues to feel relevant in every age. Because sometimes staying the same is a kind of quiet defiance. You sit down now and watch a scholar, a soft spoken woman in round glasses, clipping pages together as she annotates. Her clip is ancient, bent from use, slightly bronzed. It's not ideal anymore, but she's kept it. Why? Because it's hers. That clip has held together years of thoughts, notes, ideas, arguments, perhaps even doubts. It's not just steel wire, it's history, her history. And this is where the paperclip reaches its strangest place, not just as a tool, not even as a symbol, but as a vessel of meaning. People keep them as totems, as memory anchors. You've probably got one tucked in a drawer that you never use. You just kept it. Why? You're not sure, but you know it mattered. Maybe it held your college application. Maybe it clipped your wedding reading. Maybe it came from a letter you haven't read in years, but remember every time you see the clip. Not the paper, the clip. It's funny how we form emotional connections to small things. A bottle cap, a rock from the beach, a paperclip from a specific afternoon, because objects don't remember, but they remind. You wander now through a small side room filled with exhibits, each one a story told through a clip. One holds a flight ticket, another binds a concert set list. One is paired with a note written on the back of a receipt. Call me Jay. You don't know if that call ever happened, but the clip is still there, still holding on, just in case. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In 1999, a British art collective launched a project called the Small Things Museum. It featured hundreds of everyday items donated by ordinary people: keys, buttons, gum wrappers, and yes, paperclips. Each came with a story, a memory, a meaning far greater than the object's price tag. The paperclips were among the most frequently submitted items. Why? Because they were there, in the margins, on the desk, by the letter, in the box, not commanding attention, just present. And presence, you realize, is everything. You stand in the quiet room, the weight of it all, small and soft and steel, sinking in. The paperclip has never asked to be noticed, but it's always been there, at the edge of every page, waiting to be useful, waiting to help, waiting to hold something important together for just a little while longer. It doesn't shout, it doesn't break, it just bends and returns. And so maybe the best way to understand the paperclip isn't as a tool or a symbol or a hack or a joke or a meme. Maybe it's a gesture, a little act of holding on, of organizing the chaos, of saying, this matters, let's keep it together. You're not in a room anymore, not exactly. You're moving through time, through memory, through the soft blur of half-remembered drawers and forgotten moments. The air smells faintly of ink and cardboard. There's a rhythm now, not to your steps, but to the thought of it all, the loop, the bend, the hold. And here comes the strangest twist yet. You arrive at the edge of absurdity. Because somehow, against all logic, there are people who collect paperclips. Not in the accidental way, like when you find 20 at the bottom of a bag and think, didn't realize I had so many. No. We're talking full-blown, dedicated, lovingly cataloged collections. Labeled, stored, archived. One collector has over 1,000 distinct designs. Square clips, triangular clips, decorative ones shaped like musical notes, arrows, leaves, some plated in gold, some made from anodized titanium. There's even a clip shaped like a camel, because why not? A mainstream historical fact, during the 20th century, dozens of companies experimented with proprietary clip designs. You had the Ideal, the No-Slip, the Owl, the Viking. Each claimed to solve some minor flaw in the gem design: less tearing, better grip, more flair. None truly dethroned the classic, but the patents remain. The variations exist, and they've become treasure to a very specific kind of enthusiast. Quirky tidbit? There's an entire exhibit at the Museum of Office Tools in Japan. Yes, that's real, dedicated solely to unusual paperclip designs. It includes one made from transparent plastic, another designed for underwater filing, for real, and a commemorative clip shaped like the Tokyo Tower. It's not clear what documents need to be clipped underwater, but the option is there, just in case. Historians still argue whether these niche variations represented genuine innovation or simply marketing fluff. But to the collector, each one is a tiny fingerprint of an era, a mark of when someone, somewhere, thought, we can make this even better. You sit down now beside a large box labeled Clips, 1960s and 1970s. Inside, rows and rows of foam inserts, each cradling a single clip like a gemstone. It's oddly moving, as if the clips aren't just being preserved, they're being honored. And maybe that's the point, because collecting is never really about the object. It's about attention, the act of noticing, of pausing, of saying, this thing matters, even if only to me. You think back to your own collection, if you can call it that, the clips you've kept, in drawers, in books, in envelopes that haven't been opened in years. You didn't mean to gather them, but there they are, patient, familiar, still looped, still waiting. And here's something quietly astonishing. None of them are broken, bent, sure, misshapen, probably, but still usable, still willing, still doing the job, even after years of being forgotten. There's a kind of nobility in that. You find a clipboard now mounted on the wall. At the top is a tiny inscription, Anonymous, 1928. The clip holds a piece of music notation, hand-sketched in pencil. The notes are faint but legible, a melody, maybe unfinished. No one knows who wrote it, but someone thought it was worth keeping. And so a paperclip holds the silence of a song never played. There's something reverent about that. The clip doesn't know the tune, doesn't care, but it holds just in case someone else might. You walk past a display showing clips found in strange places, one inside an old typewriter where it had jammed between the hammers for decades, one inside the spine of a hollowed-out book used to trigger a secret mechanism, one discovered fused to a melted plastic folder during a fire, blackened but still holding two charred pages together like the last whisper of someone's filing system. And even now it continues. You pass a bulletin board at the front of the exhibit. Visitors have pinned notes using paper clips instead of thumbtacks, messages from all over the world. Used a paper clip to fix my headphones today. My mom always kept one on her keyring, just in case. I wear one on my backpack. It's silly, but it makes me feel grounded. My son gave me a drawing once, held together with a clip. I still have both. It's nothing, and it's everything. A paper clip isn't meant to last forever, but it's meant to last long enough to help, long enough to hold, long enough to be part of the story, even if only as punctuation. You pause at the final case. Inside, just one item, a single, perfectly standard silver gem paperclip, untarnished, unused. The plaque beneath it reads, "Function, form, faithful." You smile. Because that's it, really. The paperclip doesn't ask to be remembered. It just remembers for you. You're back outside now, stepping into the soft hush of evening. The museum behind you fades like a memory, gentle, persistent, already folding itself into the quieter corners of your mind. But you're not done yet, because there's one more chapter in the life of the paperclip. A stranger one. A chapter about speculation, about theory, about how something so ordinary can somehow attract the extraordinary. You're drifting toward the weird now, the whispered, the half-believed. You find yourself at the edge of a quiet street, somewhere in Middle America. It's dusk, the kind of suburb where the wind carries the smell of cut grass and barbecue smoke. But you're not looking at the lawns. You're staring at the door to an unremarkable white office building, long since abandoned. Peeling paint, dusty windows. Above the door, a faded sign reads, Paperclip Industries. This is where conspiracy joins the story. Because Project Paperclip, yes, an actual government program, was not about office supplies. It was about something far more complicated. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Operation Paperclip was the secret post-World War II initiative by the US government to recruit German scientists, many of them former Nazis, and bring them to America. Not to prosecute, to employ. Rocket engineers, chemists, physicists. Over 1,600 of them were moved to the States to work in aerospace, weapons, and space exploration. Notably, Wernher von Braun, a key figure in developing the Saturn V rocket that launched Apollo 11, came to the US through Operation Paperclip. Yes, the same man who built the V-2 rocket for Hitler's regime. Historians still argue whether this was a necessary act of Cold War pragmatism or a moral compromise too large to ever be justified. The truth is murky, haunting, and yes, paperclipped. Why that name? Paperclip? Theories abound. Some say it referred to the physical files of the German scientists, each one fastened with a clip in an intelligence office drawer. Others believe it was code, something bland enough to deflect attention. It worked. You don't remember learning about this in school, do you? The paperclip, quiet, neutral, small, became the mask for something vast, secretive, ethically slippery. It held together dossiers, travel plans, and legal justifications. It became the emblem of bureaucratic sleight of hand. And from there, the myths grew. Quirky tidbit: in the 1990s, a fringe group of theorists claimed the name paperclip was chosen because it represented binding the minds of science to the will of empire. That same group believed the government encoded secret messages in office supplies. Another claimed that the shape of the clip was an ancient symbol of control, and Ouroboros, coiled and silent. You roll your eyes, but you also lean in. Because even in nonsense, there's something telling. The paperclip's power lies in its passivity. It doesn't act, it holds. And that's exactly what bureaucracy requires: quiet containment, quiet deferral, quiet binding of things we're not ready to deal with just yet. A page here, a secret there, held in place. You walk past a chain link fence now, the paperclip building behind you. But it follows. The idea follows, because this wasn't the only time the paperclip went dark. In intelligence agencies, CIA, MI6, Stasi, clips were everywhere. Not just for files, but for signals. An upturned clip on the edge of a park bench meant drop made. A clip twisted into a triangle meant compromised. Low-tech espionage, but effective. You arrive at a quiet bench yourself, near a fountain that's long since stopped flowing. There's a clip sitting on the wood slat beside you. Standard shape, no message, at least none you can read. But it makes you wonder, how many stories were never told because a paperclip held the truth just long enough to be forgotten? And here's where the philosophical spiral deepens. There's an entire subculture online, a corner of speculative fiction, science fiction, even surrealist game theory, that treats the paperclip not just as a tool or a symbol, but as a kind of cosmic constant. The most famous example? The paperclip maximizer thought experiment. Coined by philosopher Nick Bostrom, it imagines an AI programmed with a single goal: to make paperclips. That's it. That's its entire function. But because it's an artificial superintelligence, it optimizes ruthlessly, expands endlessly. First, it builds clips, then it builds machines to build clips. Then it converts all of Earth's matter, mountains, oceans, cities, into more clips. Then the moon, then Mars. Eventually, the entire universe becomes nothing but paperclips. The cautionary tale here is about AI, of course, about giving simple goals to complex systems. But the choice of object matters. Why paperclips? Because they are so benign, so unimpeachable, so unthreatening, until they're not. You laugh softly to yourself, because of course, the same item you once used to poke your Game Boy cartridge back to life might, in theory, eat the galaxy. That's the paperclip's final paradox. The mundane becomes monstrous. The helpful becomes obsessive. The object that holds becomes the object that consumes. And yet, even here, beneath conspiracy theories, black ops programs, philosophical nightmares, the paperclip remains the same, just a bent piece of wire. No agenda, no ambition, just usefulness. It's people who assign meaning. It's us who turn holders into weapons. It's us who take something silent and ask it to speak for our secrets. You look down at your lap now. There's one resting on your knee. You don't remember picking it up. But it's there, cool against your skin, looped like always. You twist it gently, and it doesn't resist. You're almost at the end now. And yet somehow the paperclip still has more to give. You're walking through a neighborhood garage sale, the kind held on sun-warmed Saturdays where memories are laid out on folding tables and marked with handwritten price tags. There's a rusted bike, a shoebox full of cassette tapes, mismatched mugs, dog-eared books, and beside a stack of forgotten stationery, a jar of paperclips. Hundreds of them, some silver, some copper, a few color-coded in faded red, blue, green, most of them bent, tired, still ready. You pick one up. It's warm from the sun, and you think we've come full circle. Because despite all its strange detours, Clippy's digital eyes, the Norwegian resistance, deep state conspiracies, cosmic AI doomsday machines, the paperclip never stopped doing what it always did: help quietly. It never became irrelevant. It never retired. It just adapted. Here's your final mainstream historical fact. The paperclip was officially included in the Museum of Modern Art's design collection in New York City in the 1980s. Not because of its aesthetic flash or innovation, but precisely because it never changed. It was perfect the way it was, still is. There's something so quietly rebellious about that. In a world obsessed with updates, with constant reinvention, the paperclip simply said, "I'm good. Thanks." Historians still argue whether it deserves the reverence it occasionally receives, whether it's truly iconic or just stubbornly ubiquitous. But maybe the answer isn't in grand declarations or clever metaphors. Maybe the answer is in your drawer, in your bag, in that one odd clip that's been holding together those old tax forms or your favorite short story draft for 6 years too long. The quirky tidbit here is yours. Whatever personal moment you've had with a paperclip, that time you used one to fix your glasses, or to nervously fidget during a job interview, or to clasp together the first draft of something you never showed anyone, that is part of its history now, because the paperclip never existed to impress. It existed to assist, to wait quietly, to lend just enough tension to hold your life together without tearing the paper. That's what it's always done. And that's why it still matters. You place the warm clip back into the jar, someone else will find it. Maybe today, maybe years from now. They'll use it, probably without thinking. Or maybe they'll pause like you just did and smile at the idea that this little loop of wire has seen more than any of us remember. The wind picks up as you leave the sale. A few old papers flutter on a table. One of them is caught by a clip just before it slides away. Of course it is. And now, with everything said and remembered, you feel the edges of sleep begin to soften the world around you. The journey through bent steel and old memories, through libraries and lockpicks, through secret operations and forgotten drawers, it fades like the whisper of paper turning in low lamplight. You're lying still now. No need to move. Let your thoughts gently circle the loops and curves of that tiny object, so simple and unassuming, and yet so quietly constant in a world that rarely is. The paperclip holds what you give it, nothing more, nothing less. Sometimes it's just a receipt. Other times it's a moment you want to keep a little longer. And sometimes it's not even about the paper. It's about the pause, the pinch, the delicate reminder that some things don't have to be fixed or finished or perfect. They just need to be held. So let the lights in your mind dim now gently, one by one. Let the static of the day unwind, and if your thoughts drift back to that rusted clip in the drawer, or the one tucked in your notebook, or the way it once helped you open a door that wouldn't budge, smile. You're in good company. Rest easy now. Nothing is falling apart. Not tonight. Not while the paperclip is still holding.